Hello everyone, it is my favorite time of the year. No, not Thanksgiving, no, not the impending Christmas season, but Barnes & Noble 50% off Criterion sale season.
Hello darkness, my old friend, I've come to talk with you again.
Every year in July and November, Barnes & Noble has a 50% off sale of all of their Criterion titles. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Criterion Collection, they're a company that started in the mid-1980s that chief main goal is to preserve and release classics, foreign films, cult favorites, and sometimes even modern films. And for those of you who are collectors and cinephiles like myself, you hold this company in very high regard. I would like to share with you today what I got during this November sale. But before I do that, I just want to give you a kind of backstory or history about my love for Criterion films. I started collecting releases from this company probably around May of 2011. I started with kind of just blind buying certain films. At the time, I wasn't really into classic films like I am now, into foreign films like I am now, and I was just kind of trying it out because I had heard such great things about the label. And I remember Amazon was having a Criterion sale of their own, and I just bought random titles. And it really wasn't until that July of 2011 that I made my first purchases at the Barnes & Noble Criterion sale. And my first two purchases were The Darjeeling Limited, directed by Wes Anderson, and The Thin Red Line, directed by Terrence Malick. Two films that couldn't have been more opposite from one another. But ever since then, I have made it a point to collect these films, specifically going every July and every November and grabbing as many of these titles as I can. Because, unfortunately, due to them being such great releases, they are often more expensive than traditional releases. Not too much, you can usually find them rather affordable, but those two times of year is when they are at their most affordable. So without further ado, I want to give you a kind of overview of the titles I picked up. I won't go into great detail into all of them because I don't want this to be a very long video, and because there are rather a few titles. So the first title I have here is Beyond the Valley of the Dolls. And as you can see, it has wonderful, colorful cover art. I love how Criterion really does their own original cover art for most of their films, and I think all of their releases as well. I specifically bought this film because the screenplay is written by the late, great Roger Ebert, and it's also a film done by Russ Meyer. Russ Meyer, who kind of did a lot of B-movies and kind of sexploitation films back in the day, and I didn't have any of his films in my collection. And also, there is an interview in this film with one of my favorite film people of all time, and that is filmmaker John Waters. And I was really, really looking forward to seeing that. The second film I have here is kind of a blind buy called A Touch of Zen. I really love films from China, Japan, Korea, and this was kind of a blind buy for me. And I bought this specifically because the synopsis of the film I found to be very intriguing. The next release I have here is McCabe and Mrs. Miller. This is a film by the great Robert Altman, really one of the, in my opinion, best filmmakers and one of my favorite of all time. And I couldn't wait to get my hands on this release because this is the first time this has been released in Blu-ray in the United States, and I was really looking forward to seeing this film in the best quality possible. The next film I have here is The Last Chrysanthemum. And I bought this specifically because I had seen other films, and I do own other films by this director, Kenji Mizoguchi, and I absolutely adore him as a filmmaker. He does films that are very melancholic, highly depressing, but my goodness, they are just emotionally fantastic. And this next film here is by a filmmaker who is near and dear to my heart, as any filmmaker is, and that is, in my opinion, the great Orson Welles. And this was his last film, his last official feature film that he was able to complete. And unfortunately, there is a lot of films that he wasn't able to complete. I know they're trying to complete them now with whatever materials that are complete. I really want to own all of this man's film. He is a huge inspiration for me. And this film here is something I almost bought throughout the month of October because it is very much horror themed, and that is Cat People, directed by Jacques Tourneur and produced by Val Lewton. And this is a wonderful horror film from 1942. And what is really interesting about this film is they were able to create such great atmosphere, just such great theme work, without really exposing the monster too much. Continuing along here with my second trip to the Criterion sale, this is a film called A Taste of Honey, directed by Tony Richardson. And it is a film I actually first watched in a college film course. It is part of the 1960s British realism genre of films that had sprouted up. Those films were done by filmmakers like Tony Richardson, John Schlesinger, and Ken Loach. Moving right along, the next film here is another film by Robert Altman called Shortcuts. I had been waiting years to buy this film, hoping that they would finally release this film on Blu-ray. For years, the only thing that was available was a DVD release, and this is a film here that has a massive cast. Robert Altman was extremely well known for having films with huge ensemble cast, multiple storylines going at the same time, but all of it taking place in the same area, so all of these kind of plot lines would intersect with one another. If you've seen the film Nashville, that is one of the films that he is most well known for. And the last film I grabbed on my second visit to the Criterion sale is a documentary about my favorite actress of all time, Ingrid Bergman. It is titled Ingrid Bergman in Her Own Words. And in this film, they interview all kinds of actors and actresses and people who knew Ingrid Bergman and giving their perspectives on her. And I am an absolute diehard fan of hers, and I'm really looking forward to checking this out. My third trip to the sale, I picked up something that I had wanted to pick up in my second trip, but they were sold out. And it is the box set of Lone Wolf and Cub. This is a 6-film box set that has to do with the Lone Wolf and Cub series of films that were released in the 1970s. And also included in this set is Shogun Assassin. Perhaps some of you have heard of it. Shogun Assassin is essentially a re-edit of the first 2 films into one film, and they give it a new soundtrack as well as an English dub. And that film is probably more well known as inspiration for Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill films. It's kind of cool that you get that film in here as well. So you would technically get 7 films in this set. And I won't go into this packaging right now because I'm probably going to be doing a more in-depth review of this later on. And my last trip and probably my last pickups for this sale, because as much as I want to be able to buy every possible release I can, you always have to leave some more for next time. And I'm going to start right off with a film by a director who I believe is one of the greatest of all time, maybe the greatest of all time, depending on your perspective, and that is Akira Kurosawa's Dreams. And this, I believe, may have been his last film, or close to his last film that he completed. It came out in 1990, and I haven't seen this film yet. I owned it on DVD for years, but I am super happy to own this in a much better format. And I hear this film is visually fantastic, and Akira Kurosawa means so much to me as a filmmaker. His films are so unbelievably groundbreaking and just setting precedents when it comes to filmmaking. I can't gush about it enough. And keeping with that same theme of being so happy to finally own a film is One-Eyed Jacks, directed and starring Marlon Brando. This was a film I had been waiting years to own. This film has only really been available in public domain, and if you're familiar with public domain, essentially what happens is the rights lapse or they expire, and the film is now open to anyone who wants to grab it. And unfortunately that happened with One-Eyed Jacks, so we are unfortunately strapped with really bad-looking versions of this film. Really bad DVDs, really bad VHS tapes, and I'm so happy that Criterion got their hands on this film and probably gave it a great restoration. This film was part of Martin Scorsese's foundation for restoring films. He has this foundation now where he works along with Criterion and other companies to track down the master prints and preserve film, because a lot of the films from the past unfortunately were not preserved, so their film prints either go missing or deteriorate or things of that nature, and I'm really so happy that I have this film now. And this also has an introduction by the great Martin Scorsese. The last thing I picked up on the sale was something I had wanted to get the entire sale, and something I had put at my #1 kind of most want to get list, and that is Kieslowski's Decalogue. And this set here contains 10 short films, all done by the great Krzysztof Kieslowski. Those of you are probably most familiar with his Three Colors trilogy, which is an absolute masterwork. The Decalogue is 10 films that he did for television in the late 1980s. Each of the themes in the film are connected in some way to the Ten Commandments. And all these films are rather emotional, have a very humanistic standpoint, as most of his work has, at least from what I've seen. I've only really seen the Three Colors trilogy, as well as one other film. And his films are very emotional, they're very human, and they are extremely well made visually, just absolutely stunning and gorgeous. And I am, once again, so happy to have this in the collection, and I can't wait to dive into this set with all of its extras. He was an absolute master filmmaker, in my opinion. So, that has been my November 2016 Barnes & Noble 50% off Criterion sale haul. If you want to see reviews or in-depth reviews of any one of these films, please let me know. I definitely will be taking bigger looks into the Decalogue set, as well as Lone Wolf and Cub. I also do have a few other Criterion large sets that I will be going into at some point later on. But if you like this video, please check out my other videos. I have a few movie reviews, as well as episode reviews for the various comic book related television series.